Of organizations. The one is called the Mojo Lab Foundation. We are an alternative technology organization. We work with cheap and simple, easy to deploy hacks that we put into communities, which they can use to then do things with. And it's not limited to communication, but communication is our primary focus. A couple of other organizations I work with. One is called CG Swara. It's not really an organization. It's a project that has gotten a lot of good traction, and I'll be sharing that as a case study. I'm so sorry about that. That's my wallpaper. There you go, much better. So, yeah. Okay, I'll try and rush through this. So if this gets dense, just reach me after this thing is done. These are two curves that are fairly popular in the technology adoption analysis space. One is the Gartner's hype cycle curve. That's the first one. It describes the behavior of markets towards new technology and new innovation. There's always a technology trigger, something that triggers it. It reaches a peak of inflated expectations. Sounds familiar? And then it drops down to the trough of disillusionment, where you see a drop in the consumption of it. And eventually it rises back up through best practices and so forth and hits the plateau of productivity. I think this is a curve that we are starting to see with mobile adoption. I mean, we're at the point where we're at the top of that curve, where the numbers are starting to decline. The next one over there is the chasm. People who've sold software at any point in time are familiar with this diagram. It's a book that came out called Crossing the Chasm. It's very popular with technology marketers. It describes how markets pick up, again, products. And what it shows you is that initially there's a set of innovators who will pick it up. Then you have the early adopters. But once the early adopters start picking it up, usually there's a chasm before they all pick it up and start recommending it to the majority and then the laggards and the late majority and so forth. Just two things to keep at the back of your mind. What usually happens in interventions is this. The channel that you're using, its trough of disillusionment sort of coincides with the point where you're just getting past your pilot and people don't want to use it anymore because the technology is dropped. And it happens with almost every technology-based social intervention that I've worked on. Case in point is, you start with the technology vendor telling you all the things that are possible with it. You start getting really big dreams. I mean, at the point where we start expecting a mobile phone scanner to quality test medicine, I think we're already at the peak of inflated expectations. So beyond that, we just drop down into the trough. The bad news is already here. Subscriber bases are dropping. ARPUs are 60 rupees down from 2010. It used to be 132 in 2010, as I recall. It's now 98 and 80. And if you see that curve, the top of that curve looks very similar to the top of that curve over there, the first one. So what this is leading to is that what I'm kind of bringing up is that this needs to be in the back of everybody's mind while you're pushing out your interventions. If you can keep this at the back of your mind, there are things that you can do to make it work. And some of those things are what we did with CG Swara. Now, CG Swara is essentially a mobile phone-based community content sharing network. So people call in to a phone number or they give it a missed call. It calls them back and then they record a 3-minute piece of content that is then moderated by the community and released onto the internet. At which point people can start to take action. So people like you and me can listen to that message online and take some action about it. I'll just give you an example. This is the website where we publish all the messages. If you see, the content is fairly diverse. You could have anything from somebody celebrating their marriage to people talking about land rights issues, power plants, wrong arrests, all sorts of things. And these are all in local languages. I mean, I would play a Gondi song for you, but I don't think anybody here speaks Gondi, so it would be pointless. I'm sorry, I'm rushing a little bit, but I have a lot of things to say and not too much time to say it in. These are some of the numbers we've seen. If you see, it's a consistent uprise. These are the calls by Telecom Circle since Jan 2012. If you see, we've kind of 3x'd it. In Madhya Pradesh alone, then the new circles are just catching on. These are the circles that started up in 2012, in June, after June. These are the number of posts, very similar to the number of calls, but you'll see some variations here. Also, the big thing you'll see is the change in the order of magnitude. When you get 4,500 calls, out of that, roughly 280 are reports or recordings, out of which maybe 60 are actual reports that can be published, which will result in this kind of impact. So there's a lot of filtering that happens. With 4,500 calls a month, you get maybe 1 or 2 impact stories a month, but that will impact at least a few hundred people. That's just a comparison of all 4 of those. That's the daily call volume. If you see, it's gone up from somewhere around 100 in Jan 2012, and it's up to the 500, 600 mark at this point. Where does this happen? I've tried to make a little map. This is the Indian Railways network. So where you see, if you see up here in the UP and the Gujarat areas, it's really dense, which gives me an indicator that those areas are much more developed than other areas. This is where we held our initial trainings. These are the few spots where we had our initial few trainings. These are where our participants came from. And this is where we've had impact stories. So it's all in the area where the rail network starts to get sparse. This is just a recap of the quick numbers. So this is all to sort of establish that we know how to scale. And what's key is that 90% of our traffic at this point comes from people who we've never met. We've never trained, we've never interacted with. So I would say that's pretty viral. At 600 calls a day, and I just got news that we've got at this point 7 lines always engaged and 14 people waiting in queue. So if we had to support all the people who are calling us today, we would have to have 21 parallel lines. And now we're trying to distribute that out. This is where I come to the crux of the presentation. I think what is this made possible by? We've covered all of this during the last 2 days. The key thing is people, it's not tech. Technology is not what drives this kind of uptake. We are doing this because we are able to communicate with people on the ground. The tech will, just putting a mobile phone into something is not going to solve it. And that's where we are taking that peak of inflated expectations and bringing it down a little bit so that the drop to the trough is not as painful as it should be. The next thing is that we've worked with people who really, really understand local issues. Most of the people who are involved in the content moderation process are people who've been working on grassroots issues for over 5 or 10 years. And they really, really know their networks, they know their people well, and when they get the power to start bringing those voices out, it sort of really works. That's when people who trust these guys will call in and report because it's being moderated by somebody they know. Intensive community-owned moderation using commodity tools. We don't develop new software as far as possible. We don't like writing new code. There's a lot of open source code out there. We use it, we modify it, we contribute back to it, but we try not to write new code. And we use Gmail as a content management system. All our content is exported onto Gmail. Gmail is something everybody knows how to use. So we have very little trouble training people how to get onto a content management system because they're essentially opening an email, reviewing an attachment, possibly modifying it, and then sending it back onto the same conversation. So my entire track of how the report was treated is in one Gmail conversation, which makes it very, very easy to track later on. And then finally, there's the offline follow-up component, which means that every single story that is actionable has to be followed up by a human person. That's where the mobile comes in handy because they are still using mobile phones to call, but this time it's a human-to-human interaction. It's all volunteer-based, but that's what really takes a lot of patience to set up. So I think those would be my high points of what we need to have to scale things up. In terms of collaboration, I think what we need is somebody who is trusted by all stakeholders, which is a rare thing to find, to say that they will be accountable for that collaboration's success. And I think that's, until we get to that point or that body to exist, collaboration is that much more difficult because everybody is dealing with that fear that, is collaborating going to dilute my value proposition? I mean, it's almost like the corporate world's paranoia has now infested us, and we're dealing with that now. So I would say the first thing that we need to remember is that we're working on social projects. The point is not to make money. The point is really to help people out. And if we can keep that at the back of our mind, I think we'll be able to collaborate just fine. Cheers.